Ni hao, I'm Phil, and my buddy Luke and I are on a mission to detail the ultimate blueprint for Mandarin fluency, and one of those essential details is the Chinese character guo. Now, today we're going to cover the past experience marker and negation, which is kind of a pretentious way of saying that you have or haven't done something ever in the past. We're going to cover the primary verb function of to cross, also to celebrate, to go through or experience, exceeding a certain limit, and a softer version of the conjunction but with guo. And I'm really excited about all of this because guo is a hugely important character. And by mastering this character, you're going to impress Chinese speakers, and we're going to give you a plethora of examples through the presentation today that will make it so that you're 1% better at Chinese today than you were yesterday. Hey, you do that enough days in a row, and fluency and acquisition is not a matter of if, but when. So the past experience marker, like I said, it's kind of a pretentious way to say it. How about we just say whether you have or haven't ever done something? For example, I have been to China in my life. I've never been to Korea. So that's what we're talking about here. How do you express that in Chinese? Well, you want to take an action plus guo, and you get that the action has been experienced ever before. In other words, you've crossed that path. You've gone through it. So I'm sure you're getting the idea from those 6 usages I showed you at the beginning of this presentation that Chinese characters tend to orbit some kind of root meaning. And that's what's happening here. So even though this is a grammatical function, you'll see that whether it's crossing or celebrating or some version of guo, it usually has a meaning that comes around to experience. So let's get that more clearly delineated with this example. Kan, this means to see. And of course, in this case, guo is the grammatical marker. So we get kan guo. This means you've ever seen something in your life. And by the way, you'll notice that guo switches to 5th tone when used in this grammatical way. So if you're ever reading pinyin and you notice that guo is 5th tone, then for sure it's that grammatical usage there. So let's imagine that somebody asks you the question, 你看过这个电影吗? Have you seen this movie before? Well, how might you answer, I have? Well, one way to answer is to say, 看过. Just that simple. Or you could say, 我看过. I have seen it. Or you could respond with the whole statement, 我看过这个电影. Right? Hey, real quick, this video was shot in front of a live audience of about 100 people online. And if you'd like to join the next one, you can do so by joining our free community. We do a live Q&A after each video shoot is complete, so you can join our free community, check the calendar function, and see when the next one is happening. We do them regularly. See you there. So the idea would be that when you're actually answering a question, you want to respond in a way that is very colloquial and how people actually talk, and they'll either say 看过 or 我看过. But you should still know what the full statement is. Well, why? Because you may not be responding to a question. You might just be wanting to say to somebody that you haven't seen a movie or haven't seen a particular movie, and you're not responding to anything in particular. In which case, you need to know what is the 看过 short for? Well, it's short for 我看过这个电影. Now, how would you say that you haven't seen the movie? Well, luckily, it's quite easy. All you have to do is add the Chinese character 没看过. So 没 negates things in the past. And if you just say 没 before the verb, it means it didn't happen. And in the case of adding 过, it's it didn't happen ever before. 没看过. 我没看过. 我没看过这个电影. So those are the 3 versions. How about this one? 吃 means to eat. You add 过 and you get 吃过, meaning you have eaten. And often it is asked in the context of a question like this. 你吃过这家餐厅吗? Well, that means, have you eaten at this restaurant before? Now, some of you who are non-beginners might be thinking, hey, wouldn't you say 你在这家餐厅吃过吗? Which would be a correct sentence, and it includes the preposition 在 to indicate location, but it's actually perfectly fine to say 你吃过这家餐厅吗 in Chinese because the context is clear. Technically speaking, what this sentence means is, did you eat the restaurant, like the entire building? But because nobody thinks that that's what you're actually saying, you can omit the 在, which indicates the location, and they know, okay, you're not saying, did you eat the restaurant ever? It's, did you eat at this restaurant ever? So it's important to know, Chinese is very contextual, and this type of shorthand happens all the time, and we do this in our own languages too, so don't get too freaked out about it. Most of the time, it makes it very easy because you say fewer things and you can change the grammar structure to something that's a lot easier. So somebody asks you, 你吃过这家餐厅吗? How would you say I have? Well, 吃过 or 我吃过. And if you were just making a statement, you might say 我吃过这家餐厅. And that would mean I have eaten at this restaurant. And note that in the previous one, we had 看过. Now we have 吃过. Now, you'll notice that even though it's quite simple, you do have to repeat the verb. In English, you could just say yes or I have. But in Chinese, you're for sure going to need to say the verb back to the person. So in this case, 吃过. In the previous case, 看过. And now let's look at how you would say I haven't eaten at this restaurant. 我没吃过. Or just 没吃过. And again, if you're just making a statement, 我没吃过这家餐厅. How about this one? 听 means listen. 听过 means have heard. So for example, somebody asks you, 你听过这首歌吗? Have you heard this song before? How would you respond, you have heard it? Well, 听过 or 我听过. And again, a statement, 我听过这首歌. And now, how do you negate it? Say, no, I haven't heard it before. Well, 没听过. The negation plus the action plus 过 means it hasn't happened ever before. 我没听过这首歌. Now, we covered le in a previous presentation, and because people mistakenly think that le indicates past tense, they sometimes wonder how 过 is different from le. Because after all, they both seem to be talking about the past in some way, but it's really not the case. It's change versus experience. And let's look at a couple of sentences that really illustrates this point. 我去了中国. I went to China. The action of going, 去, is complete, 了. So I went to China. How about this one? 我去过中国. I have done the action 去 ever before in the past. So let me ask you something. 我去了中国. The person who said that, are they in China right now? Well, yes, because the action of going is completed. But the second person, 我去过中国, are they in China? Well, probably not, because that's a weird thing to say if you're in China. Like imagine you're standing in China and you're talking to a Chinese person and you're saying, I've been to China. It's like, no duh, we're here right now, right? So this illustrates well the difference between 了 and 过. 他吃了北京烤鸭. 他吃过北京烤鸭. So this is the difference between an instance in which he ate Peking duck and having ever eaten Peking duck before. And I like this example because sometimes people have never had it. And by the way, if you haven't, it's delicious. So you should totally get it. But if you have never had it before, you could say 我没吃过, right? But if you have, that's how you would express it. And it's a big difference because in the case of 他吃了北京烤鸭, that's just talking about like what he ate for dinner that night. It's an instance. It's not something that you're going to talk about regarding your entire history of life, right? 我看了这部电影. I watched this movie versus 我看过这部电影. I have watched this movie before. So in this instance, it's more like I watched this movie like recently. It's usually how you would think of it there. Whereas the second one, it could have been 25 years ago that you watched the movie, right? So the difference is massive in terms of the time scale you're dealing with. Now, interestingly enough, though, you can use 过 and 了 together. And when you do, it actually means that there's an occurred action. So the implication when you use 过 and 了 together in a sentence is that something has occurred and it doesn't need to happen again. You're good. You've eaten and you don't need to eat again. You've seen it and you don't need to see it again. You've gone and you don't need to go again. Things like that. And so sometimes you see 过 and 了 together and it's like, oh, I'm losing my mind. What do I do with these? It just is a way of emphasizing. It's a matter of emphasis that makes this different from either 过 or 了 on their own. So let's give you some examples. 我去过了. I have already been there. And that means I don't need to go again, whatever it was. Like, you know, maybe you were looking for your keys and you're missing them and you went to the shop where you were earlier and you went there and you didn't find them. So somebody said, did you go to the shop? You might say, 我去过了. And that would just mean I've been there and I don't need to go back. Now, notice that you can also put the object in like so. 我去过中国了. So maybe you're planning to travel to every country in the world and somebody says, well, why don't you go to China? And you could say, 我去过中国了, because you don't need to go again to get to your goal of going to every country in the world, right? So In this instance, the emphasis is about that it's happened and doesn't need to happen again. Now, this one is really useful in day-to-day life. 我吃过了. This means I have already eaten, and it's very useful because Chinese people are super friendly and they are always willing to offer you more and more food. And it's kind of like that mom who won't accept that you're full and is just like, oh, you don't eat enough, let me give you more. And so when you just say 我吃了, that means I ate. And it should be enough for most people, but in often cases, they'll be like, buddy, you should really have some. You're just like, 我吃过了. Then it's pretty clear. I already ate. I'm good. I'm set to go. And you could say, 我吃过饭了. That would mean I have already had a meal. It's just adding in the object. 吃饭 is already a verb object word. So by saying, 我吃过饭了, that's just adding in the object and making it even clearer what you're talking about. Now, another example here would be, 我看过了. So 我看了 would mean I saw it. 我看过 would mean I saw it ever in the past. 我看过了 is I already saw it and I don't need to see it again. And again, you can put the object in. 我看过这部电影了. I have already watched this movie before. I don't need to see it again. So that ought to give you a sense of how to use 过 in the past experience marker. And here's the thing I want to emphasize at this point. Grammar is to acquisition what a dietary supplement is to nutrition. It can't replace the consumption of the language. Now, by pointing out all of these things regarding past experience marker and negation, it will help you notice it when you're consuming Chinese. But you couldn't acquire off of the grammar points, just like you couldn't get all of your nutrition just from nutritional supplements. And in fact, if you only ate nutritional supplements, you'd probably die. So it's the consumption first, and then the grammar point hopefully will help you notice things while you're consuming. So this is all just to say not to overthink grammar, or more importantly, not to think that because you learned a grammar point, that therefore you've acquired it. No, the grammar point helps you notice it, and the noticing it in your real consumption of the language, that's what will get you to acquire it. All right, well, let's move on to something that's not a grammar point. 过 can mean to cross. It's something where it's just a basic verb meaning to cross, and it's actually its primary meaning. If you look at 过, you'll notice that it has the road component there on the left and bottom. And so you cross roads, you cross paths, you cross over things that relate to travel. So clearly we can see it in the character that this relates to movement. And now here you'll see several characters that we can combine with 过 to exemplify its verb usage as cross. And hey, remember that learning character by character is the much better way to go here. Why? Because a lot of teachers, understandably, teach word by word because there's a bunch of really high frequency words that they use, and they're native Chinese people, and they're like, you're going to need to learn this word, so I'm going to teach it to you. It's a very understandable instinct. Problem is, suppose they're going to teach you a word where the two characters are unknown to you. Well, that means you've got the pinyin pronunciations that you don't know. It's not a phonetic language, so you have to learn that. And then it's got tones. And so did you learn the tones of it? Both characters have maybe 3 components in it, and then they also have a meaning. So right there, there's something like 16 or 17 things you don't know if you don't know the characters. That's too much for our short-term memory to handle. We can only handle about 6 disparate facts at a time. So it's really important to learn the language character by character. And that way, when you arrive at a new word, you don't have to start from understanding what the characters are. You already know what the characters are. All you have to understand is their relationship. So I just highly recommend that as you're going through the process of acquiring Chinese, don't go word by word, go character by character, and then unlock the words from there. That's what we do here at Mandarin Blueprint, by the way. All right, so to cross, what types of things might you cross? Well, how about a street? 过马路. So 过, to cross, 马路, street. This is just 2 words, and I'm just trying to exemplify that you can just use this straight up as a verb. 过马路, to cross the street. And hey, this is what the chicken did that one day, and we're always so curious as to why. Now, how about this one? 过桥. Not a trick question. This just means to cross a bridge. So if you see a 桥 and you want to cross it, you can say 过桥. How about this one? 过来. So to cross, come, well, this means to come over. And the opposite would be 过去. And in this case, the 去 is 5th tone because 过去 with 4th tone actually means the past in general, but 过去 means to go over. And listen, I'll cover more about how directional complements work when I do a presentation on 来 and 去. But for now, just understand that 过 is correct when you're referring to the same level. In other words, you're not talking about someone who is above you, like they're up the stairs and you're saying, come down, or they're at the bottom of the mountain and you're saying, come up. But when you're on the same plane, like you're on the same floor of a building or you're out in the ground, you can say 过去 to mean go over and 过来 to mean come over. And it's all from the perspective of the speaker, just like it is in English. Now this word, I like it. 经过. 经 means through. It actually has a bunch of meanings, but in this case it's through and 过 to cross. So 经过 means to pass by. And this is exactly the type of word where you really need to have an example sentence to understand how it functions. You can't just look at 经过's translation in the dictionary and know how to use it. And this is a mistake that a lot of people make, is that they learn words on flashcards and they see the translation, they memorize the translation. They don't understand that you can't just use this word in any instance where in English you could use to pass by. So let me show you what I mean. Take a look at this sentence. 我每天都会经过哪家咖啡店. Okay, so I pass by that coffee shop every day. That's literally passing by it, but you could also use it metaphorically like this. 经过几个月的努力，他终于完成了这个项目. Oh, okay, after several months of hard work, so going through the hard work, he finally completed the project. So if I didn't see 经过 in a sentence like that, I would just see to pass or to go through or to pass by. That's not enough. You need to see it in the context of sentences, which is why you have to keep moving beyond the context of what you're currently in. When you learn a character, learn it well, and then put it into a word and learn that word well. But then you have to put that word into a sentence. And then you really should even put that sentence into a paragraph, put that paragraph into a story or an article. And this is why you should be in an ever-expanding contextual journey as you're going through Mandarin. Now, yet another reason why you need sentences is because sometimes you have words like 通过. Tong means lead to or connect, and 过 to cross. Well, this means to pass. So once again, you'd look at this and go, well, to pass, I learned 经过 means to pass by. Or how would I use them differently? Are they different? And it's the kind of thing where, again, you need some sentences. And by the way, tong is a super common word that you will hear every time you pick up the phone in Chinese, because anytime that somebody doesn't answer the phone, you're going to hear this wonderful lady say, 对不起，你拨打的电话暂时无法接通，请稍后再拨. That is saying, sorry, the number you have dialed is currently unavailable to connect. 接通, dial back in a bit. And this is something that you'll hear so often that it's a good thing to know, because then you'll get lots of practice. You'll get lots of reps of hearing 接通. Now, 通过 means to pass, but again, you can't just look at to pass and say, what does that mean? So let's look at a sentence. 他通过了这次考试. Oh, it means like pass an exam. You would not use 经过 here. You would say 通过. So you went through the channel 通 and crossed it 过 of academic standard. Congratulations. Now here's another way to use 通过 that I'm sure you'll really like. 我们通过电子邮件联系客户. Okay, we through email contacted the client, or we contact clients through email. This is giving you a channel. 通过 comes before a channel or the method you use to do something. You could say 通过电话联系客户. That would mean through phone that we contacted the clients. Or it could really be anything else. It could be the method you used for, picking up chicks or something like that. It's not necessarily just about communication. It's about what channel or method did you use to achieve some end. So that's 过, meaning to cross. And cross means you go through life, you experience something, and sometimes those experiences have to do with a celebration. So this is actually the word you use for things like celebrate, birthday, 过生日, to celebrate a birthday. For example, 今天你过生日，祝你生日快乐. And by the way, that is, of course, the lyrics to the song, 祝你生日快乐. Okay, I'm not going to make you go through that. But what we have here is 过, meaning to celebrate. It's an experience, of course, but in this case, it specifically means celebrate and be happy about it. Like 过年. Well, celebrate the year. Oh, this is probably like New Year's Day, right? No, we're talking about China here. This is to celebrate the Chinese New Year. When they say 过年, they're for sure talking about the Chinese New Year, unless it's like the day of New Year's Day, which they call 元旦节, the original dawn festival. But what is really the New Year for Chinese people is Chinese New Year. Such a big deal in China. So what's amazing about that too is nian is the word for year, but when you say guo nian, every Chinese person knows, well, that's Chinese New Year for sure. That's the celebration. Like nian goes from meaning year to specifically meaning Chinese New Year. It's amazing. Now, check this out. 过年时 街上十分热闹. During the new year, the streets are very lively. And let me tell you, it depends on where you are and exactly what time, because Spring Festival lasts like a month. And sure, the night of Chinese New Year leading up to midnight and then really the whole night, it's very 热闹. Hot and lively, that's what that kind of means. Like hot and noisy. 热闹is a great word. And I one time went to Qingchengshan with Luke and a buddy of his who was visiting from Australia. And that's a mountain in northwestern Sichuan that is the birthplace of Taoism. And like historically, there's myths about Laozi like floating around the trees there. And it's a really beautiful place. And we went to Houshan and celebrated Chinese New Year there. And it was the most authentically Chinese experience I've ever had. Like they were having a great time setting off fireworks all night. We went to KTV. The kids were up the entire night. We tried to go to bed at 3 a.m. No chance. People were still setting off fireworks all out through the streets. So it certainly was lively, but here's the opposite side of it. When I lived in Chengdu, most people would leave the city during Chinese New Year because they would go back to their hometowns, and all the shops were closed, all the businesses were closed. Everybody was home with their families. So you would ride your bike around the city, and it was like a ghost city. So it was funny when this sentence came in from our assistants, this thing about the streets being very lively. I thought, well, that really depends on when. Now, how about this one? 过, sheng, holy, dan, birth, 节, holiday. So to celebrate the holy birth holiday, well, what would that be? 过圣诞节, that's Christmas. So perhaps somebody's going to say, 他很希望在过圣诞节的时候收到礼物. He really hopes to receive gifts during Christmas. So that gives you a sense of when 过 can mean celebrate, and all of it, whether it's celebrating or crossing or past experience, it all has to do with the idea of going through or experiencing. And I want to show you some words that have this meaning but aren't the grammatical function. So how about this? 过一下. 过, go through. 一, one. 下, measure or time. Like it's like a time you did something is 一下. And it could be a moment. But if you go through one time, it usually just means go over again. And even though again is not specifically shown in the characters here, that's often the context that it's used. For example, we're doing this whole presentation today. Maybe later I would say to you, 过一下今天讲课的内容, which would just mean go over the content of today's class again. Now, how about this one? 过几天, go through a few day. Well, this just means after a few days or going through a few days. And again, 过 is a verb here. It just means to go through time in this sense. So how about this? 过几天我就开始想家了. I start to miss home after a few days. And by the way, when 过 is used this way as a verb, you could put 了 after it again to indicate that the action is completed. So if I said 过了几天我就开始想家了, that would mean after a few days I started to miss home, right? So in that case, you might see it and think, is that the function of 过 plus 了 together, meaning that something has happened and doesn't need to happen again? Well, no, it's just the standard verb 过 plus a 了, meaning completed action. And so you could see 过了and think that it's this grammatical function, but really it's just a verb plus 了. Now, how about this one? 过滤. This means to go through filter, and you'll notice the water component there on the left. Well, this just means to filter. And like many things that happen in English, you've got the literal filtering of water. Sure, you would say 过滤 for that. But it can also apply to like a digital filter. For example, you're on Taobao and you're looking for shoes and you're like, I just want to look at men's shoes. So you would go to the 过滤 function on the web page, just like you might on Amazon. So you can see how even in Chinese, there's these things that are literal meanings that then get modernized for a modern context. They still use them. How about this one? 过夜, to go through night. Well, that means to spend the night. And here's a context you might use it. Now, this one would obviously be said by a child. So, 我父母管得很严，不允许我在别人家过夜. My parents are very strict and don't allow me to sleep over at other people's houses. And this is exactly the type of thing, the context where you might use 过夜. This is one of my favorite words in Chinese because I think it's very poetic. Difficult, 难, to go through, 过, 难过. Well, it means sad. I mean, isn't that poetic? And is sad, upset. And what's interesting about this word is that 过, of course, is a verb meaning to go through, but when it gets combined with 难, difficult, it turns into an adjective word. And this can happen a lot in Chinese because 过, meaning to go through, is just a morpheme, which means it's a little mini meaning. And when you combine it with another meaning from another character, that doesn't maintains its part of speech. It doesn't mean it maintains being a verb. It could turn into a noun, could turn into an adjective. So just because you see a character that's normally a verb by itself used in that way does not mean it will maintain its verb function. Just bear that in mind. But 难过, sad, great word. Now let's look at this word, 度过. Spend time, go through. And so, okay, to spend time feels kind of repetitive. So I guess I'm going to need to see this in a sentence to understand exactly how it works. So let's check this out. 我在姥姥家度过了一个快乐的暑假. Oh, I spent a happy summer at my grandma's house. Oh, I see. So this is relating more to like something you would spend time doing that's like a memory or an experience, and you take away some happy moments from your life that you'll take with you into old age. It's just wonderful to imagine 度过 in that way. But here's why I bring this up. This word should really not be taught like I'm teaching it now. And the reason I say that is because 度过, it's one thing to learn that 过 is a past experience marker and you're going to see it a lot, and it's something you're going to want to know in day-to-day life. It's so common, you can actually understand it by having a foreigner who learned Chinese explain it to you. But you get past a certain point and it's the wrong method, because 度过, sure, I could explain to you that you use it in the context of a memory and you're going to come out of that with some experiences and life lessons, right? But wouldn't it be better to just see it in the context of a story? Wouldn't it be better to just be immersed in the plot line of a really interesting TV show and then see this sentence? Well, right. At some point, you know too much. This is too advanced a word to learn by getting explained in a video like this. So some point you pass that threshold, and when you feel like that, that's when it's really time to immerse hard. Okay, so that's to go through our experience, and I want to cover this one, which is a really interesting usage of 过, which means to exceed a certain limit. And probably the most quintessential word that expresses this idea is 超过, to surpass, exceed. This means exceed, and it means it literally. Like if car A is racing car B, and car B passes car A, you would say, car B 超过 car A 了, right? It actually passed car A. So it's literal. It can be also used metaphorically. There's a bunch of other words you can use to get across metaphorical transcendence or overcoming. But this is the word that leads to 过, meaning exceed. So sometimes there's a really, really common word that ends up creating one of the two characters as an abbreviation for that word. So that's what happens with 过 in these other words. For example, 过期, surpass a period of time. What do you think that might mean? Well, expire, 过期. This could be milk, it could be some kind of food that expires, or it could be your passport. 他的护照过期了，需要去申请新的. His passport has expired and needs to be renewed. So you can see here, obvious idea, exceeds the period, so it's expired. How about this one? One of my favorite words, 过敏. So excessively sensitive. What does it mean to be excessively sensitive to something, especially in the context of a person? Well, it means allergic. Right, allergies are excessive sensitivity to something like peanuts or pollen or something like that, or cats, 猫. So here's how you might use this in a sentence. 他对花生过敏，吃了以后会起疹子. He is allergic to peanuts. He gets a rash after eating them. And note that structure. 对 something, 过敏. For example, got a couple of 猫 here, and I'm very happy to say that it is not true for me to say 对猫过敏, which would mean I am towards cats overly sensitive, or I'm allergic to cats. Thankfully, I'm not, because I love these two. But here's what I'm saying. If you want to say that you're allergic to anything, you just say 对 that thing, 过敏. I, as a young man, was allergic to pollen, so I would say 对花粉过敏. 花粉. I love that. Flower powder. I towards flower powder overly sensitive. I'm allergic to pollen. 过瘾, really cool word because yin means addiction or craving. And so it kind of has like sort of a negative sense to it. It even has the illness component in it. However, when you say completely or overly craving, it becomes somehow a positive word and it means exhilarating. So for example, somebody might say, 吃完这顿大餐真是过瘾, 非常满足. The meal was so satisfying. It was a real treat. And that's the perfect way to use it. I love that it kind of transcends the negative meaning. It's like it became so addictive and craving that actually now it's once again become great. So next we have 过时. So 时 means time, but it can also mean an era. So if something is over an era, exceeds an era, it's out of an era, well, it's outdated. It's like, huh, your hat is so 2023. That's really 过时. And we'll finish with this one, 过分. So 分 means a limit of some kind. So you have exceeded the limit, and it means excessive in the sense of like you've crossed the line, right? So somebody might say directly to you, 你太过分了. And if somebody says that to you, that means you are over the line and they're mad. So be careful if somebody ever says that. And you could also use it in a context of a sentence like this. 他对这个问题过分担心. He is overly worried about this issue. And by the way, look at that. There's that 对 something, 过分 or 过敏. So you can see that structure is going to come up a lot more. In this case, it's not saying 你太过分了, you are just over the line, but it is saying that you're overly worried. So there we have 过, meaning exceeding a certain limit. And there's one more thing I want to talk about with 过, which is when you use it as a conjunction but. Because people will often ask about this. There are a few different ways to say however or but in Chinese. And sometimes people say, well, what's the difference between 不过 and other ones like 但是 or 可是? And it's always that it's a bit softer. So let me show you what I mean. 现在的天气很好，不过马上就要下雨了。So this is, the weather is nice now, but it's going to rain soon. But this is just standard stuff. I mean, of course, like it rains, it snows, it's sunny, it's cloudy. This is just life. And so it's not that big of a deal. And so by saying, 不过马上就要下雨了, that's just getting across the idea that this isn't that big of a deal. It's like, sure, yeah, there's a transition that's going to happen, but who cares? 你说的对，不过我有自己的想法。What you said is correct, but I have my own thoughts. So in this case, it's kind of being polite, tactful, like being like, all right, you said something and sure, you're right, but I also have my own way of thinking of it. You're not trying to be rude. You're trying to be a little bit more polite. You're being softer by saying 不过。这道菜看起来不错，不过味道有点奇怪。So the person who says this is trying to be tactful and polite because they're basically saying, oh, it looks good. It just, there was maybe a little strange taste to it. If they were being a bit more blunt, they might not have used 不过. Now, naturally, we'll need to compare 不过 with a more stern form of but. 但是, for example, 我喜欢他，但是他不喜欢我，这很难过. So there's that 难过 again. It means I like him, but he doesn't like me. It's very sad. Now, same sentence. 我喜欢他，不过他不喜欢我，这也没关系. Right? So I like him, but he doesn't like me. That's okay. Right? So you see how it's a different tone with the exact same sentence? And so that extra sentence that we tack on there is just trying to tell you how does the person feel about it. 我喜欢这件衣服，但是太贵了，我不想买. I like this shirt, but it's too expensive. I don't want to buy it. It's no question about it. It is too expensive. 但是太贵了. By saying 但是 there, I'm not questioning whether it's too expensive or not. It is. So that's it. It's more stern. How about this? 我喜欢这件衣服，不过太贵了，我在犹豫. I like this shirt. It's too expensive. I'm hesitating. So you kind of you do want it, but you're like, oh, it's pretty expensive. So it's softer. It's not as certain. So that should give you a good sense of how to use 不过 compared to other versions of but. And look at all the stuff that we covered today. A past experience marker and negation, really just have you ever done something or haven't done something in the past. To cross, to celebrate, to go through or experience, exceeding a certain limit, and a softer version of but with 不过. Now, For those of you watching live, Q&A is next. And for those of you watching on YouTube, do you want to join the next live event? Well, you can do so by joining our free community. The link is in the description. And there's actually more than just live events over there. We have a bunch of resources in the Mandarin Blueprint resource library. We have some free courses there. And of course, the community interaction on the forum is fantastic. So join the next live event, join our free community, and be the first to know when the next thing is coming. Thank you, everyone. 感激不尽，再见。